6 months had passed since the Maran Treaty, and the galaxy had changed in ways nobody could have predicted. Trade routes through the Thornwood Expanse were now open to all species, and Maran bioengineering technology was revolutionizing medicine and agriculture across 100 worlds. And the name Dol Sunwu was spoken with reverence in academic circles that had once refused to read his papers. But Sunwu himself had refused every honor, every promotion, and every comfortable position that had been offered to him. He wanted to keep working. The new diplomatic vessel was called the Patient Word, named in honor of the quality that had made the Maran Treaty possible. And Yaren commanded it with the same efficiency she had always shown. But things were different now. Sunwu had his own station on the bridge, and the crew treated him as an equal partner rather than an unwanted passenger. And Yaren found herself asking for his opinion before making major decisions. They had become something that neither of them had expected. They had become friends. Incoming transmission from the council. The communications officer announced one morning, Priority 1. All channels. Yaren frowned. Priority 1 transmissions were reserved for catastrophic emergencies. And the galaxy had been relatively peaceful for months. On screen, the Velith Overseer appeared. And even through the transmission, Yaren could see that its crystalline body was flickering with distress. All diplomatic vessels are ordered to return to Harmony 7 immediately. The Overseer said, "Something has emerged from the Galactic Rim, and we do not know what it wants." The transmission included sensor data, and Yaren felt her blood go cold as she studied it. Ships were approaching from beyond the edge of known space, and they were enormous. And they were completely unlike anything in any database. "The Seraph," Sunwu whispered from his station. Everyone turned to look at him. "You know what they are?" Yaren asked. "Only from myths," he replied, his face pale. "The Maran have stories about beings who existed before all other species, who travel the galaxy judging civilizations and deciding which ones deserve to continue." "That sounds like a legend. So did the Maran 300 years ago." The Patient Word raced back to Harmony 7, and they arrived to find the station in chaos. Representatives from every species crowded the quarters, and fear hung in the air like smoke. And everyone was talking about the Seraph and what they might want. A message had been broadcast in every known language simultaneously, and its content was simple. "We will judge if this galaxy deserves to continue." The council held emergency sessions day and night, and military forces mobilized across known space. And the Kravik prepared for war while the Onari attempted telepathic contact without success. The Maran recognized the Seraph from their oldest myths as destroyers of civilizations. Beings who had ended countless societies before recorded history began. Panic spread on the third day. The council convened to decide who would speak for the galaxy when the Seraph arrived. Every species nominated their greatest leaders, their most powerful warriors, their most brilliant minds. And the debate over who should represent all of sentient life threatened to tear the fragile unity apart. Yaren stood and waited for silence. "I nominate Dol Sunwu," she said. The chamber went quiet, and she could feel the weight of disbelief pressing down from every direction. "He is a linguist," someone said from the Anari delegation. "Not a warrior or a leader. He is the only person in this galaxy who has ever convinced an isolationist species to rejoin civilization through nothing but words." Yaren replied. "And if the Seraph want to judge us, then perhaps they should judge the best of what we can be." The debate continued for hours, but in the end, no one could offer a better alternative. Sunwu was chosen. The Seraph arrived 3 days later. Their ships did not look like ships at all, but like fragments of dead stars shaped into impossible geometries. And they moved without any visible propulsion. And their presence made sensors scream with data that could not be processed. A single vessel separated from the fleet and approached Harmony 7. And a chamber of pure light appeared in the station's core. and Sunwoo walked into it alone. Yaren watched from the observation deck as the light swallowed him. She had never felt so helpless in her entire life inside the chamber. Sunwoo found himself surrounded by beings that existed partially outside normal reality. The Serath, spoken patterns that moved through dimensions he could not perceive. And their language was not made of sounds, but of concepts pressed directly into existence. He should not have been able to understand them, but he could not perfectly. Not completely, but enough to find the patterns beneath the chaos. Enough to recognize the questions hiding in the noise. "Why do you judge?" he asked. The Serath seemed surprised. "We judge because civilizations destroy themselves," they replied through meanings that burned in his mind. "And we end the process early to preserve the potential for something better. Have you ever been wrong?" Silence. No species had ever asked them questions before. "We have made choices we regret," they admitted. "But the alternative is allowing destruction to spread unchecked." Sunwoo nodded slowly. "My civilization has made choices it regrets," he said. "And we have caused harm and allowed suffering and failed to listen when listening would have saved lives. Then you understand why judgment is necessary." "I understand why you believe it is," Sunwoo replied. "But I also know that regret is meaningless without the chance to do better." He told them about the Marin. He told them about 300 years of isolation caused by a failure to listen, and about the healing that had begun when someone chose to try again. He told them about his partner who had laughed at him and then stood beside him when it mattered. He told them about a galaxy filled with flawed and frightened species who were slowly, painfully learning to cooperate. "You judge civilizations by what they are," he said, "but you do not see what they might become." The Serath considered his words for a long time. Finally, they spoke again. "This galaxy has learned to listen," they said, "and we will return in 1,000 years to see if it has learned to speak." The light faded. The Serath departed. Sunwoo collapsed. Yaren was the first one through the door when the chamber opened, and she caught him before he hit the ground. And she carried him to medical herself, despite the protests of the guards who tried to help when he woke. She was still there. "The galaxy wants to give you every honor imaginable," she told him. "Statues and titles and probably a planet or two." Sunwoo groaned and covered his face with his hands. "Can we just go back to our ship instead?" Yaren laughed, and the sound was warm and bright and genuine. "Him as my partner," she said, echoing her own words from what felt like a lifetime ago. "Best decision I never made." She helped him stand, and they walked out of the medical bay together. And the corridors were filled with people who wanted to thank them and celebrate them, but they just kept walking. They had work to do. The galaxy had been given 1,000 years to prove itself, and neither of them planned to waste a single day on the patient word. Everything returned to normal. Sunwoo studied new languages at his station, and Yaren commanded the crew with quiet confidence. And they traveled to places where understanding was needed and listening could make a difference. They were partners, and the galaxy was a little bit better because of it. Somewhere in the vast distance between stars, the Serath watched and waited, and wondered if perhaps they had finally found a civilization worth believing in. Only time would tell. But for the first time in their long existence, they had hope. The Galactic Council Chamber on Harmony 7 was designed to make everyone feel small. Seats rose in tiers toward a ceiling lost in shadow, and representatives from 100 species filled those seats, and their voices combined into a constant hum of whispered conversation and clicking mandibles and telepathic murmurs. Yaren stood at the center of the floor with Sunwoo beside her, and she had never felt more exposed in her life. The provisional treaty with the Marin had caused a sensation across the galaxy, and news feeds had been discussing nothing else for weeks. And everyone wanted to know how two humans had accomplished what diplomats had failed to do for 3 centuries. But not everyone was happy about it. The Kravik Dominion formally challenges the validity of these negotiations. Vorath announced from his seat high in the tiers, his voice echoing through the chamber with practiced authority. The humming conversations went quiet. On what grounds? The Velith Overseer asked from the central podium. Vorath rose to his full height, his insectoid body casting a long shadow over the delegates below him. The human linguist acted alone, without proper authorization, he said. And the treaty he carries was obtained through unknown methods that may have violated council protocols. It was a weak argument, and everyone knew it. But the Kravik had reasons for making it anyway. The Thornwood Expanse had been unclaimed territory for 300 years, and the Kravik had been slowly expanding their borders into its edges. And the return of the Murren would force them to give up territory they had come to consider their own. Furthermore, Vorath continued, we demand a formal debate under Article 17 of the old laws, and the loser's proposals will be permanently rejected by this council. A murmur ran through the chamber. Article 17 was ancient and rarely used, a relic from an era when disputes were settled through verbal combat rather than votes. And whoever lost would see their work destroyed forever. The human delegation may choose their representative, the overseer said, and the debate will begin within the hour. Yaren felt every eye in the chamber turn toward her. She was the obvious choice, and she knew it, and she had been preparing arguments for weeks in case something like this happened. But she was a soldier, not a speaker, and the Kravik were masters of aggressive rhetoric. And she was not certain she could win. I will represent humanity, Sunwoo said quietly. The chamber erupted. Laughter came from a dozen different species, and the Kravik made their clicking sounds of mockery. And even some of the human delegates looked embarrassed. Vorath's mandibles spread wide in what could only be described as a grin. The galaxy thanks you for this gift, he said. Yaren grabbed Sunwoo's arm and pulled him close. What are you doing? She hissed. Trusting you to trust me, he replied. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him this was insane, wanted to take his place and protect him from the humiliation that was coming. But she remembered the treaty in her quarters, and she remembered the respect in his voice when he spoke of the Marin, and she remembered that he had spent 15 years being told he was worthless. I second his nomination, she said loudly. The laughter stopped. Yaren stepped forward and faced the council. Dole Sunwoo will represent humanity in this debate, she declared, because he is my partner. The words hung in the air, and their meaning was clear to everyone watching. She was staking her reputation on him. The overseer nodded slowly. The debate will begin. What followed was unlike anything Yaren had ever witnessed. Vorath attacked immediately, his words like weapons, each sentence designed to cut and wound and humiliate. He called Sunwoo a fraud, a lucky fool, a weakness that humanity had dressed up as strength. He questioned his credentials, his methods, his right to speak for anyone but himself. Sunwoo absorbed it all. He did not fight back. He did not raise his voice. He simply waited until Vorath had exhausted his first assault. And then he spoke. Ambassador, may I ask you a question? Vorath clicked his mandibles in surprise. This is a debate, not an interview. Debates require understanding, Sunwoo replied calmly. And I want to understand why the Kravik Dominion opposes peace with the Marn. The question was simple, but it cut through all the rhetoric and exposed the truth beneath. Vorath hesitated. We oppose invalid procedures, he said finally. But his voice had lost some of its confidence. Is that all? Sunwoo waited. The silence stretched. The Thornwood Expanse contains resources that the Dominion has been harvesting for decades, Vorath admitted grudgingly. And the return of the Murren threatens our access. So this is about territory, Sunwoo said. It is about rights earned through presence. Sunwoo nodded, as if this was exactly what he expected. The Marn have been present in the Thornwood expanse for longer than the Kravik have existed as a species, he said. And their claim is stronger by any measure. Varath's color darkened with anger. They abandoned their claim when they retreated into isolation. They retreated because they were attacked by visitors who could not listen, Sunwoo replied. And 300 years of fear is not the same as abandonment. He turned to address the full council. The Kravik are afraid, he said, and I understand that fear. Because change is frightening and loss is painful, and the universe does not always give us what we deserve. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every seat in the chamber. But fear should not determine policy, and old wounds should not prevent new healing. And the Marn are offering something that benefits everyone. He looked back at Varth. What if I told you that the Marn have agreed to share their bioengineering knowledge as part of this treaty? He said. And what if I told you that the Kravik Dominion could receive first access to this technology, elevating your status among all species? Varth went still. This was not in the original proposal. I added it, Sunwoo said simply, because I spent the last 3 weeks talking to the Marn about what would make this work for everyone. And they agreed that generosity was better than conflict. The chamber buzzed with surprise. You negotiated additional terms? The overseer asked. I listened to what people were afraid of, Sunwoo replied, and I tried to address those fears. And the Marn understood that peace requires everyone to gain something. Vorath stood silent for a long moment, his colors shifting through emotions too complex to read the Kravik Dominion. He said finally, withdraws its challenge. The chamber erupted again, but this time with approval instead of mockery. And the vote that followed was unanimous. The treaty was accepted. The Marn would return to Galactic Society when the session ended and the delegates began to file out. Yaren found Sunwoo sitting alone in a corner of the chamber, his hands shaking against his knees. She sat down beside him without speaking. I was terrified, he admitted quietly. You did not show it. I showed it constantly, he said with a weak laugh. I just talked through it. They sat together in comfortable silence as the chamber emptied around them. I was wrong about you, Yaren said finally. Sunwoo smiled tiredly. You were not entirely wrong, he replied. I really am bad at physical training. She laughed. And it was a different kind of laugh than the one she had given him at their first meeting. Warmer and genuine, and perhaps even a little fond. We make a good team, she said. We do, he agreed, and for the first time since they had been paired, neither of them doubted it. The Marn flagship was called the Grove of Echoes, and Sunwoo understood why the moment he stepped aboard, the walls were alive. They breathed in slow rhythms that matched the pulse of light through the organic hull, and the corridors shifted and changed as he walked, opening new paths and closing old ones, as if the ship itself was guiding him somewhere. 2 Marn escorts walked beside him, and he studied them carefully without staring. They were tall and slender, with bodies that seemed to be made of the same material as their ships, smooth and luminescent, and constantly shifting in color based on their emotions. He had read about this in the ancient texts, but seeing it in person was something else entirely. When they were calm, they glowed soft blue, and when they were curious, hints of green rippled across their skin, and when they were suspicious, dark purple shadows crept along their limbs. Right now, they were all 3 colors at once. The escorts brought him to a chamber at the heart of the ship, a vast space that looked like the inside of a living flower, with petals of light curving overhead and a floor that felt warm beneath his feet. 7 figures waited for him there, arranged in a half-circle that reminded him of judges in a courtroom. These were the chorus, the ruling council of the Moren, and their voices were legendary in the old texts for their ability to speak in perfect harmony. You claim to remember our voice, the central figure said, and all 7 of them spoke together so that the words echoed and overlapped and became something more than language. I claim to have listened, Sunwoo replied carefully, matching his tones as best he could, and to have learned, and to hope that I might understand. The chorus shifted colors, moving from suspicious purple to something warmer. Though not quite welcoming, many have come before you, they said together, and all of them brought machines that broke all words, and all of them left with nothing but our silence. I did not bring machines, Sunwoo said. I brought only myself and 15 years of study and a great deal of patience. Patience, the chorus repeated, and the word rippled through the chamber like a stone dropped in still water. That is not a quality we associate with the other species. They began to test him, then questions came in rapid succession, layered with traps and hidden meanings. And the tone shifted constantly so that a single wrong emphasis would change everything. They asked him about the history of human expansion into space, and he answered honestly about the wars and the mistakes and the slow learning. They asked him about the purpose of the initiative, and he told them about the dream of cooperation and the reality of politics and the hope that someday the dream might win. They asked him why humans had come to the Thornwood Expanse, and he said simply that his partner had been given a mission and he had come to help her complete it. Hours passed. Sunwoo's throat grew raw from speaking in tones. His body was not designed to produce, and his legs ached from standing, and his mind felt stretched thin from constant concentration. But he did not stop. Finally, the chorus fell silent, and the 7 figures conferred among themselves in harmonies, too complex for him to follow. Then the central figure stepped forward alone. 300 years ago, she said, her voice now singular and clear. A delegation came to us from the Galactic Council, and they brought machines to speak for them. And those machines could not hear the difference between welcome and warning. Sunwoo nodded slowly. I read about it in your texts, he said. But only fragments, only pieces of the story. Then hear the rest, she said. The chorus began to sing, and the chamber filled with memory made sound. And Sunwoo listened as 3 centuries of pain poured out. The diplomatic mission had arrived with confidence and technology, with translators that claimed perfect accuracy, and the Marin had greeted them with their most sacred welcome, a phrase that combined joy and hope and the promise of friendship. But the machines had heard only the sounds, not the meaning, and they had rendered the greeting as something else entirely, an insult, a threat, a declaration of war. The visitors had responded with weapons, and thousands of Marin had died before the misunderstanding became clear. And by then the damage was too deep to repair. The Marin had retreated into the Thornwood Expanse and swore never to trust outsiders again when the singing stopped. Sunwoo stood in silence for a long moment. He did not try to apologize, because apologies could not undo 300 years of isolation. He did not try to explain, because explanations would sound like excuses. Instead, he simply said, "Tell me more." The chorus stared at him. "You do not defend your kind?" The central figure asked. "I was not there," Sunwoo replied, "and I cannot change what happened. And anything I say will not bring back those who were lost." He paused, choosing his next words with care. "But I can listen," he continued, "and I can remember, and I can carry your story back to those who have never heard it truly." The chorus conferred again, their colors shifting through shades he did not recognize, and when they turned back to him, their glow had changed to something almost golden. "You are unusual for your kind," they said together, "and we would make you an offer." "I am listening." "Stay with us," they said. "Become our voice to the outside universe. Live among us and learn our ways and speak for us when others come." It was an honor beyond anything Sunwoo had ever imagined. He would be the first outsider accepted by the Marn in 300 years, and scholars across the galaxy would speak his name with reverence, and his life's work would finally mean something. "I cannot," he said. The golden glow flickered. You refuse us? I have a partner waiting for me, Sunwoo explained, and I do not abandon partners, even when the offer is more than I deserve. The chorus went absolutely still. Your partner, the central figure said slowly. The one who laughed at you, Sunwoo smiled sadly. She was not wrong to doubt me, he said. I am not impressive by any standard that matters to warriors and diplomats. And she had every reason to expect someone better. And yet you would return to her. Yes, the Maran understood partnership in ways that other species could not. And they valued loyalty above almost everything else. And Sunwoo had studied their culture long enough to know that his answer would matter more than anything else he had said. The chorus began to glow brighter. Then we will give you something to bring back to her, the central figure said, and to the initiative, and to all who would listen. They offered him a treaty provisional, conditional, and filled with requirements that would take years to satisfy. But real, the Maran would end their isolation, and they would speak to the galaxy again. And it was happening because one quiet linguist had chosen to listen. Sunwoo accepted the treaty with shaking hands. When he returned to the shuttle, his legs almost gave out beneath him when he crossed back to the steady word. He could barely stand, but when Yaren met him at the airlock with questions in her eyes, he held up the treaty and said simply, "They want to talk." And for the first time since they had been paired, she looked at him without disappointment. She looked at him with something that might have been respect. The diplomatic vessel Steadyward launched from Harmony 7 at exactly the scheduled time. And Commander Yaren Chai stood on the bridge watching the station grow smaller through the viewport. She had run ships before, many of them larger and more dangerous than this one. And she fell into command like slipping on a familiar coat. The crew was mixed, with humans and aliens working side by side in the way the initiative demanded. And they all responded to her orders with crisp efficiency. All except one. Sunwoo had arrived on time with his boots matching, which Yaren supposed was progress. But he had also brought 17 more tablets and a collection of audio recordings that took up half a cargo bay. She assigned him quarters at the far end of the ship, as far from the bridge as possible, without putting him in an airlock. The linguist will not be needed for primary operations, she told the crew, and he is to be treated as a passenger unless I say otherwise. Nobody argued the journey to the Thornwood Expanse would take 3 weeks, and Yaren planned to use that time drilling the crew for every possible scenario. They practiced emergency protocols and combat formations and diplomatic procedures. And they ran simulations of Maran contact based on what little information existed. Sunwoo did not participate. He stayed in his quarters or in the cargo bay with his recordings, and he ate his meals alone in the small hours when the mess hall was empty. And he spoke to no one unless absolutely required. The crew followed Yaren's lead and treated him like he did not exist. On the 8th day, the Kravik ambassador came to the bridge uninvited. His name was Vorith, and he was smaller than most of his species, but twice as unpleasant. And the initiative had assigned him as an observer to ensure the mission followed proper protocols. Your crew performs well, Vorith said, his mandibles clicking in what might have been approval. But your partner is concerning. He is not my concern, Yaren replied without looking up from her console. He should be, Vorith continued, because the Maran will eat him if you ever let him off this ship. And his failure will become your failure. Yaren finally turned to face the massive insectoid. Ambassador, I did not choose my partner, and I do not pretend to understand why the algorithm paired us. But I will complete this mission with or without his help. Vorith made the clicking sound again, but this time it was clearly laughter. You humans are fascinating, he said. You pretend that your weakest members do not embarrass you. He left before Yaren could respond, which was probably wise. On the 15th day, they entered the Thornwood Expanse. The cosmic flora was more beautiful than any image could capture. with massive tendrils of bioluminescent growth stretching between stars like bridges made of living light. And the crew gathered at viewports to watch the colors shift and dance. Navigation became difficult immediately, and the sensors filled with interference. And Yaren had to slow their speed to a crawl to avoid colliding with the organic structures. "We are being watched," the Anari communications officer reported. "I can feel mines in the distance, many of them. And they are aware of our presence. Can you communicate with them?" Yaren asked. The Anari shook her head. "Their thoughts are shaped differently than any species I have encountered," she said. "And when I try to reach them, it is like shouting at water. They push deeper into the expanse." Following coordinates that the initiative had provided based on ancient star charts, and on the 18th day, the Maran finally revealed themselves. Ships emerged from the flora like creatures waking from sleep. And they were not built of metal, but grown from the same organic material as the expanse itself. With hulls that pulsed with soft light and weapons that looked like thorns ready to strike. There were at least 20 of them. And they surrounded the steady word in seconds. A broadcast came through on all channels. And the universal translator sputtered and sparked, trying to make sense of it before producing only random words that meant nothing. "They are telling us to leave the communications," officer guessed. "They are telling us to die." Vorath countered with something like satisfaction in his voice. Yaren's hand moved toward the weapons console, and her training screamed at her to prepare for combat, to raise shields and charge weapons and show these isolationists that humans did not frighten easily. "Wait." The voice came from the doorway, and Yaren turned to see Sunwoo standing there with one of his tablets clutched to his chest. "The translator is failing because Maran is tonal," he said quickly. "The same words spoken at different pitches means completely different things. And the machines cannot tell the difference. Then what are they actually saying?" Yaren demanded Sunwoo listen to the broadcast for a long moment. His head tilted and his eyes closed. "They are asking who we are and why we have come," he said finally. "And they are offering us a chance to answer before they decide what to do." He stepped forward without asking permission. "Let me respond." Yaren should have said no. And every instinct told her to maintain control, to handle this herself, to trust nobody with something this important. But she remembered those translations in her quarters. And she remembered 15 years of work that nobody had wanted to hear. "Do it," she said. Sunwoo moved to the communications console, and he opened a channel, and he began to speak in a language that sounded like singing and crying and laughing all at once. His voice was imperfect, and he stumbled over some of the sounds. But the meaning came through clearly enough that even Yaren could sense it. He was introducing them as travelers who came to listen. The Maran ships held their position for a long, terrible moment. Then a response came. And this time, the sounds were different, warmer. And Sunwoo's face changed as he translated. "They will speak with us," he said. "But only with the one who remembers their voice." "What does that mean?" Yaren asked. "They want me," Sunwoo said quietly. "Alone." "On their flagship." Vorath clicked his mandibles. "This is obviously a trap," he said. "And you would be foolish to send your weakest member into enemy territory." Yaren looked at Sunwoo. At this strange man who had spent 15 years learning a language nobody else cared about, who had been mocked and dismissed and laughed. And since the moment she met him, "Go," she said. He nodded and headed for the shuttle bay without hesitation. "Sunwoo," she called. After him, he stopped at the door. They stopped talking because everyone stopped listening correctly, she said, repeating his own words back to him. "So listen well." He smiled, just a little. And then he was gone. Yaren watched through the viewport as a small shuttle crossed the distance between ships. And she felt something she had not expected to feel. She was worried about him. Commander Yaren Chai walked through the doors of the Galactic Cooperation Initiative with her head held high and her uniform pressed to perfection. And she expected nothing less than excellence from whatever partner the algorithm had chosen. For her, the training facility on Harmony 7 was a massive structure of glass and metal that floated in neutral space between three major galactic powers. And species from across the known universe came here to form partnerships that would shape the future of diplomacy. Yaren had earned her place through years of service, through battles won and negotiations completed, through a reputation that made other officers speak her name with respect and sometimes fear. She had not come here to be paired with a nobody. The great hall was filled with representatives from dozens of species, and Yaren studied them as she walked to her assigned platform, noting the massive Krovic warriors with their insectoid bodies and clicking mandibles, the floating Onari whose telepathic whispers tickled the edge of her mind, and the crystalline Velith who served as overseers of this whole operation, Commander Yaren Chai of Earth. The Velith overseer announced, its voice like wind chimes in a storm. You have been paired with Dole Sunwoo of Earth. Yaren waited for a warrior to step forward, or perhaps a senior diplomat with gray hair and decades of experience. Instead, a thin man emerged from the crowd, carrying at least 7 translation tablets stacked in his arms, and he nearly dropped 3 of them as he climbed the steps to her platform. He wore the standard civilian uniform of the initiative, but one of his boots was brown and the other was black, and his hair stuck up in 3 different directions, as if he had forgotten what a mirror was. There must be a mistake, Yaren said. Immediately the Velith turned its crystalline head toward her, light refracting through its body in patterns that suggested mild annoyance. The compatibility algorithms are absolute, it replied, and they have never been wrong in 400 years of operation. Yaren looked at Sunwoo again, at his awkward stance and his armful of tablets and his mismatched boots, and she laughed. It was not a kind laugh, and she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Him as my partner?" The hall went quiet, and dozens of alien eyes turned toward the 2 humans on the platform. Sunwoo's face went red, but he did not respond, and he simply adjusted his grip on his tablets and waited. The Krovic delegation made a sound that Yaren recognized as their version of laughter, a harsh clicking that echoed through the hall like stones being ground together. The humans paired their strong with their weak. One of the massive insectoids said to its companions, "Perhaps they hope the weakness will cancel out." The Onari exchanged glances that needed no telepathy to understand, and even the Velith overseer seemed to dim slightly, as if embarrassed on behalf of the initiative. "I request a different partner," Yaren said firmly. "Request denied." The Velith replied without hesitation, "The pairing stands, and your first mission has already been assigned." Yaren clenched her jaw so hard her teeth ached. "And what mission would that be?" "You will negotiate safe passage through the Thornwood Expanse," the overseer said, "and you will make contact with the Marin, who have refused all communication for 300 years. A murmur ran through the hall. The Marin were legendary in their isolation, and every attempt to reach them had ended in silence or destruction. And most species had simply accepted that the Thornwood Expanse was territory that could not be crossed, an impossible mission. Yaren muttered. With an impossible partner, Sunwoo finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. The Marin did not always refuse communication, he said. Yaren turned to look at him with barely concealed contempt. "Everyone knows that." "Yes," Sunwoo agreed. "But not everyone knows why they stopped." He said nothing more, and Yaren was not about to ask. So she simply stepped off the platform and walked away without looking back. The assignment was official, and there was nothing she could do about it. But she did not have to pretend she was happy that evening. Yaren sat in her quarters, reviewing everything the initiative had on the Thornwood Expanse. which was not much. The region was filled with strange cosmic flora that grew between stars, massive bioluminescent structures that made navigation difficult and sensors unreliable. And the Maran had used this natural maze to keep everyone out for 3 centuries. A soft knock came at her door. She ignored it. The knock came again. And then a tablet slid under the gap at the bottom of the door. Yurin stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. The screen displayed text in a language she did not recognize, but someone had added translations in neat handwriting along the margins. And the notes continued for dozens of pages. "This is original Maran scripture," she whispered to herself. Every scholar in the galaxy had tried to translate Maran texts, and every single one had failed, producing only gibberish that made no sense in any context. But these translations were different. They told stories of a people who valued listening above all else, who believed that true understanding required patience and silence and respect, who had once welcomed visitors from across the stars with open arms, and then something had changed. The final pages described an incident 300 years ago when visitors came with machines that spoke for them. Machines that twisted words and broke meanings and turned a greeting into an insult so profound that the Maran had closed their borders forever. Yurin read the whole thing twice. Then she opened her door and found Sunwoo standing in the corridor. "Waiting, where did you get this?" she demanded. "I translated it myself," he said simply. Over the past 15 years, Yurin wanted to call him a liar, but the work in her hands was too detailed and too consistent to be fake. And she had studied enough forgeries in her career to know the difference. "Why did you not share this before?" she asked. "I tried," Sunwoo said with a small shrug. "But nobody wanted to listen to a linguist with no reputation and no connections. And the academic councils rejected my papers 12 times. He reached out and took the tablet back from her hands. "The Maran stopped talking because everyone stopped listening correctly," he said. "And I think I know how to fix that." Yurin studied his face, looking for arrogance or pride. But she found only quiet certainty and perhaps a little hope. "We leave at dawn," she said finally. "And do not be late." Sunwoo nodded and turned to walk away. "And Sunwoo," Yurin added. He stopped but did not turn around. "Fix your boots." She closed the door before she could see his reaction. And she told herself that she was still angry about this assignment and still certain that he would be useless in any real crisis. But she kept thinking about those translations long into the night. And when sleep finally came, she dreamed of a people who had simply wanted to be heard.